and consider a culture that produces them worthy of elimination. So, of course, if you can, this just becomes a joke, really, at this point, playing with images like this and then mashing them up to become something like this. We're so comfortable with what was formerly obscene that we play with it now. So it doesn't really have the strength that it once did. Shock advertising was definitely something that was used. I think looking around, and certainly looking around at modern media consumers, I think we're fairly able to discriminate. We filter out a lot of these sorts of messages, and I don't think shock gets through in the same ways it once did anymore. All right, so moving on. Branding. The most prevalent mode of increasing memetic visibility in a hyper-connected world is branding. Edward E. Wilson and J. Wes Unruh write, at its heart, branding, or as they refer to it, sigilization, they're Discordian memetic magicians, is a technique of encoding memes for network distribution. At its heart, sigilization is a technique of encoding memes for network distribution. Iconification creates a cognitive space for the viewer to identify with an idea. The more iconic a meme is, the more universally infectious it becomes. This universality comes at a cost, however, the loss of specific meaning. Consider a global brand such as Coke, where the product being sold, fizzy sugar water, has become nearly irrelevant to the brand experience being sold. What Zay Frank calls an emotional aftertaste. That's how he refers to brands. When a symbol unmoors itself from what it symbolizes, it loses meaning. It becomes ineffective. That's Arundhati Roy. Thanks to the pervasiveness of modern advertising and a century or two of branding, people are now exposed to a phenomenal number of brands every day, with each brand meaning less and less. This makes branding a relatively weak mechanism of initial memetic transmission. And although brands can still be a strong ongoing identifier, their power is nothing compared to that of direct experience. Build a man a fire and he'll be warm for a night. Set a man on fire and he'll be warm for the rest of his life. All right. Maybe I'm going a bit too far, but revolution is not showing life to people, but making them live. We confer special value to our own experiences in a place that advertising and many of these other memetic splices can't reach. I suggest that one of the best things that we can do as revolutionaries is try to create the spaces, create context, create experiences where people can experience life for themselves. Don't tell them how to live. Create a space that allows them to try, allows them to have the experience, and then get a sensation, which they will get, that is different from what they get out of mediated mass culture, where they've been given a limited number of options and are participating in a system that is, their very complicity in makes them, horribly hypocritical and probably relatively unfulfilled. True revolution must be experiential, not academic or dogmatic. So design memes that create engagement rather than spectacle, resulting in action and not merely observation. So how do we do that? How do we create engagement and not just spectacle and perpetuate the society of the spectacle? How do we get people to have action and not just observe, not just consume? We go to the next slide. No, this is not how. This is certainly one manifestation of that. This is a photograph from Burning Man, and these are people expressing themselves in a way that probably was not, is certainly not available in off-the-rack culture. Whatever this identity is, I don't even know what that is. All right. John Evans, who goes by Resendi online, suggests that Burning Man is a testbed for a post-scarcity future. And I'll get into what that means in a minute. Consensus defines context. So Socially, context is suggested by design, architecture, decoration, sigils, but defined by consensus. For example, consider a church and a nightclub. In a church, people tend to behave with quiet reverence, whereas in a nightclub, people are louder and more animated. They are more likely to dance, become intoxicated, and make sexual advances, all behaviors that they would likely not adopt in a church. And yet both a church and a nightclub are fundamentally merely boxes. There are some architectural differences between them, of course, but these are merely there to suggest the context. That is, to give the people the cues necessary to remind them how to behave in a space. But those cues do not define the context. Rather, shared behavior does. In 2000, I built an art project in the Black Rock Desert at Burning Man, where we created 100 8-foot-tall wooden dominoes, which we intended to leave out for people to stand up to. These are each, taller than a person. We intended to leave them out so that people could play with them, make sculptures from them, play games of dominoes, stack them up, knock them over. This gives you some idea of the size. About 2/3 of the way through the event, an 80-mile-an-hour windstorm came and lifted all of our dominoes and took them into a neighboring state. Luckily, we were downwind from the city, so no one was killed by a giant flying domino. In the space that was left, we had about 7 dominoes left over, and we turned one aside, and just in our sort of stunned awe at what had just taken place when the dust had cleared, we started drinking ourselves, and then some people came up and said, "Hey, what is this?" Like, well, it's a bar. We're drinking, it's a domino bar. What does it look like? We have drinks, it's a bar. Really? Okay, well, I'll have a beer. And then a few more people came up, and a few more people came up. And by the end of the first night, we had about 30 people drinking at our little domino bar. I went to my car, and I got the only CDs that I brought with me, which are all jazz music, as it happened. And I put on some old Billie Holiday CDs. And all of a sudden, it became a little cozy jazz nightclub. We had no roof, we had no walls. But the next night, people came back and acted like they were regulars. And they showed up in, women came back in evening gowns, and guys started to, dress a little spiffy and put suit jackets on. And the whole thing suddenly became this amazing, interactive, collaborative performance between all the people that chose to come to it, with no one ever actually saying, "Okay, here's the plan." And by the third night, even by the second night, you could just step back and look, and what you saw were a bunch of people in a little smoky jazz nightclub. And it existed, and it had this amazing realization that in every way that mattered, that was a jazz nightclub. We didn't have the walls, we didn't have the furnishings or the lights, and if it had rained, we would have probably all ended up going home. But by crafting consensus between a certain critical mass of participants, and for this particular experience, it was about 10 or 12. When it started, somewhere above there, 15 people, 20 people, all of a sudden it wasn't just you and your friends playing make-believe. It was an actual dynamic social space that could have people leave it and enter it without you doing anything, and it perpetuated the context that had been adopted by the participants without any direction. So, how do we do this? How can we take this lesson and bring it out into the world? Context hacking. Eleanor was talking about this. Some of you may be familiar with this. As some types of actions are like flash mobs. Eleanor spoke about one that we did in San Francisco twice this year, once about 8 months ago and once last month at Noisebridge. And it was the BART Swings project. Whoops. In this project, we went down to the subway system in San Francisco, and we placed a series of these red wooden swings in the BART cars. The BART is our subway system. And this is Audrey Penvin, who will be giving a talk on photography tomorrow. This, as Mike Burstein, the creator and organizer of this idea, said, this is easy to do. It's easy to go into a subway system, hang up a train, and have one of your friends sit and swing on it. This is a lot harder. I have no idea who he is. It's just some random commuter, and look how happy he looks. You're like, I'm on a swing.